but I found this spreadsheet that Bob had done research on before our trip, and it goes on for pages and pages. He was researching all the possible sites. It took a lot of planning. Anyway.
It wasn't just, we'll get into it besides it, but there was a challenge in that we were coming out of COVID, so places weren't necessarily open, or they weren't open every day, and there was been a hurricane, so kind of getting, they're open on Friday, they're open on Monday. It was a fun little puzzle, but all right. Now, don't worry, this is not gonna be how we spent our summer vacation, with a whole lot of slides. We do have 1,700 photos. We'll just be sharing 79 of them with you, so that doesn't sound so bad. This is not a travel log. I do want to mention, our daughter Rebecca said, you want a little help putting this into like a PowerPoint or something? We said, well, I figured it out a few years ago when I did some teaching, but sure, if you can do it, just drop them in. Don't do anything fancy, just drop them in. She didn't get the don't do anything fancy part. So all this fancy stuff that you see here is our daughter Rebecca.
Yeah, she's an online teacher, does all this kind of stuff all the time. She's great. And this is not a primer on Black history, which is far too broad and deep a topic to cover in 45 minutes. We pass through the how slavery happened really super fast. Don't touch on everything.
Yeah, it's more of a sampler, but and also this is not our attempt to convince you about any particular view of history or race relations, though we do hope to stimulate some thoughts. So we'll see how that goes. And this next part, if you want to kind of why are we here, this is the main thing. What we really desire is that you'll be inspired to become curious about stories and places that you don't know. And to see how God may use those stories and places to challenge your thinking and expand your soul. Because that's what's happened to us. We're sharing how our thinking has been challenged and our soul has been expanded by this experience of just being curious and opening ourselves up. I'm going to say something in a minute which will, I see a hand, but hold on what we say in a minute. Go ahead. And this is part of our personal journey, really. As we lived through the last 4 years, as Americans and as Pasadenans and as Christians and as leaders of the church, a lot of that is involved in this for us.
Yeah. And we've learned a lot more about Black history over the past 4 years, but we're focusing this morning on just the experiences and lessons from this particular Black history for a trip.
And having seen a hand already, I have to say, I'm really sorry that we don't have any time for questions or comments. We're trying to say, we did get a few extra minutes, but when we ran through it yesterday, it was running long. So we would love to don't cover up my notes there with your notes. We're very happy to discuss with people afterwards, if you like, or on other occasions. And we hope you'll discuss among yourselves, but this is not one of those discussion mornings because we've just got so much that we're trying to convey to you.
Some other time.
Some other time, yes, we'll get.
So why did we take this trip?
Okay. God calls us clearly through Scripture to humility and mercy and justice. In Micah 6:8 says, He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
And it's in the New Testament too. Jesus said, you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Matthew 23:23. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Matthew 11:29.
Now, a few years ago, I did teaching by Zoom, so it was an adventure. Those of you who don't remember, like 150 slides a week, we were really going through a lot of stuff on humility and mercy and justice. And if you were there, there were just scores and scores of Bible references. We don't have time for that right now, but if anybody would like to be reminded of that or have a copy of those notes, I've got an outline or PowerPoint or whatever, I'm happy to give that to you, just let me know. So we're not gonna revisit all that stuff, but I did go back and just, pull out a few of the key points from that teaching. One is that scripture very specifically commands us to give mercy to those who need it. And we went through and we looked at all the phrases of who gets mercy. And among those phrases from scripture are the powerless, those in distress, the afflicted, those in chains of injustice, those bearing the yoke of oppression. And how can we do that? How can we give them mercy unless we are aware of their plight? Also, the Bible expressly calls us to protect and advocate for the powerless and fight against systemic injustice. Again, I can give you all the dozens of references another time. But how can we do that unless we're aware of their plight? Jesus was present with and cared for those who are oppressed and powerless. He told us to do the same. We should humbly learn from and about others by walking with them and listening to them in love. And we can't do that if we not aware of what their life is.
So in light of this, we felt a deep need to be more aware of how much we did not know and understand about Black history.
As we anticipated the trip and as we experienced it and as we talked about really two words, story and place. The story part for me, let me take you back to a few years ago. As the pandemic was starting, and our county health person, doctor, whatever her name was every other day at 1:00 they'd have the press conference. We'd eat lunch and watch the press conference and seeing all the statistics and so on. And after 2 or 3 weeks, they started differentiating the statistics by race. So how in terms of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths by white, Asian, Black, Latino, I think was basically the categories they used. And, COVID was having a much stronger impact on the Black and Latino populations. And I remember my reaction to that. It wasn't cold-hearted, it's sort of matter of fact, but, well, that's not surprising because generally in terms of economic standing, that the Black people and Hispanic people generally, on average, have less resources than white and Asian people do. And it sucks to be poor. And it's just, that's one of the things to be poor. But then I started to ask the question, so, well, why is that? Why, for example, on average, are Black families less affluent than white families? And you might have less answers. You might say, well, maybe they're not as well educated. Well, why is that? Well, maybe they don't have as strong a family. Well, why is that? Well, maybe because there are a lot of single parent families. Well, why is that? Well, a lot of fathers are in prison. Well, why is that? Well, maybe they broke the law. Well, why is that? What I've been trying to train myself to do is to ask the next question. The question that takes me back, that catch up to myself here. What happened before this to take the story in this direction? To keep asking the next question. We can talk about that for quite a while. So and then also to go back to the beginning of the story and work forward and say, what? This happened 200 years ago, 400 years ago. What happened next because of that? What happened next because of that? And then to kind of see those two ends coming together. As we start from the beginning and move forward, as we start from now and ask the questions back, you say, oh, I see now how these things connect. So that's story. And,
And we all learn best through story. This is how God made his love for us and planned for us through thousands of years.
The problem is, we all tend to seek out and favor the narratives which reinforce our current values and our sense of well-being. And we avoid those, and we even reject those which challenge our status quo. This is just, everybody has a tendency to do this. And we need to recognize our tendency to do this. We want to hear the stories. when you go on Facebook or the news, wherever you latch on to stories that say what you want them to say, that reinforce your view of the world. And you kind of tend to avoid the stories that tell you something different. So that's a natural thing, but that's something we need to overcome. So the second thing is place. What struck me when this first occurred to me, the notion of place. I'm sorry, look at that. I'll get there. I got introduced first time. To the little squiggly mark is when I one of the other. I'm trying to say that. I guess the squiggly mark, let me know. So you remember when there was terrorists running people down on the bridge in London across from Parliament, all right? And we saw that on TV. I said, you know, we were there not too long ago. We were on that bridge. And recognizing that, I identified differently with what was happening because we were on that bridge. There's the top picture there. That's a picture we took on that bridge. More recently, we were in Athens, and we were on Mars Hill on the Areopagus, and there's that little picture. And to say, you know, the Apostle Paul was here. It's not very big. It's about the size of this room. It's not a little bigger, but it's not very big. You know, Paul was standing somewhere about here when he read and we read the scripture from Acts 17. We read his sermon. We just sort of said those words again in this place, same place, different time, and we just felt a real connection there. Recently, you remember in Prague, there was the shooting in the Eucharist. So we were there. Right there's a picture we took, a year and a half ago. The dog picture. That's where the shooting took place. We felt that connection. We connect with people and their experiences and their struggles by being in the same physical place. So that's story and place.
And I'm sure a lot of you have traveled to the Holy Land or something and seen the places where Jesus walked and the disciples were and so on. You can connect with that. Seeing it impacts you a lot.
And you probably heard stories that you hadn't heard before. So that's a kind of similar experience. So, where did we go? Mark, this is your cue. We took 11 days. We drove 2,032 miles.
There are plenty of these, enough for everybody. Yeah,
you can each have an individual copy if you like. We have plenty of them. We started, we flew to New Orleans and then we ended our trip, this portion of the trip in St. Augustine. We went to 7 states, 16 cities, and 50 sites in 11 days. So you know we're moving.
Yeah.
You know, and those 50 sites might be we drive by and say there it is, or it might be we spend 4 hours. You know, so it's we are not going to go through all those. We're giving them to you so you can know what they are. But we are only going to touch on them.
and we're now focusing, not just focusing on slavery and civil rights, but also hit some cultural impact of Black history sites.
Okay, so what did we experience? And most of our time together now, we're gonna just share things that we experienced, some chronological highlights. There are. This is like 3% maybe of what we'd like to share. And maybe we'll see how the time goes. We may be able to speak a little more extensively than we thought we might. But we're only 5 minutes ahead, so we're still. We don't have a lot extra. Don't have a lot of extra.
Stick to the script.
So go ahead.
Okay. We started in New Orleans, and just outside of town there was a Destrehan plantation, which we visited. There were some other plantations that were closed, but we could get to this one. And we saw the owner's house and some of the slave quarters and that kind of things. One of the main things we learned from this site, though, was that in Louisiana, there was a Napoleonic type slavery. They were not part of the United States yet when slavery was started. And they had different rules and so on for their slaves. And it was fascinating. They had to have a day off and they could only work so many hours. The owners had to provide them with so much, a certain amount of food and clothing, that kind of stuff. It was still horrible, but it was a different style. And then, when the Louisiana Purchase happened, the United States was in charge, and it got waivers.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
One example would be, how old does a slave child have to be before you can sell them? And I think for the Napoleonic law, it was something like 12, and in American law, or whatever the state was at the time, it was, I think, 7 or something. I mean, that's that kind of thing. Hours of work, just all sorts of things that, the right to purchase one's own freedom, that you had the right, sort of for appraised value, to buy your own freedom, if you could do some things. And so Susan.
The next slide shows, this was a list that was posted of the slave names, what kind of jobs they could do, and their appraised value. And again, under the old system, they could earn some money on their own and buy their slavery, buy their freedom eventually. And also at this plantation, they have a great bookstore, and I picked up this book called Voices from Slavery, and it's actual interviews of some hundreds of slaves when they were, anywhere from 83 to 100 years old, much afterwards. And we found out this is actually part of WPA project in 1939, when, what do they call it? A slave narrative project. And they paid people to research this and get interviewed former slaves. It was fascinating. So, and in New Orleans, there was a Louis Armstrong Park, which we visited, and inside the park was Congo Square. And the picture, there's a statue, sculpture celebrating it on Sundays. A lot of the slaves in the area, they have often their own, could gather.
Back in the French days.
Back in the French days, could gather in Congo Square to do their own music and celebrations and, et cetera. And they had this area blocked up that this is where they used to meet.
We also, as I said, we wanted to be aware of cultural contributions. So of course, staying in the French Quarter in New Orleans, we had to go to a jazz hall, and yes, we were sitting that close. My knees and his knees were just about touching. And if we had more time, maybe afterwards, I would love to play some clips. So it was just a wonderful, wonderful time of jazz, enjoying that.
And then we were able to get to this Free People of Color Museum in New Orleans.
Let me just say the story. So this was one of those places where we couldn't get the schedule right. We were going to see it on, I think, Thursday, and they were closed on Thursday, and I was interacting with them and so on. But the night before, they sent us an email and said, well, we have a tour group coming tomorrow. We're going to friend, would you like to come in? So we were on our way out of town that day. So we said, well, okay, sure. So we went, did some of the Trinidad district there in New Orleans. And so we arrived first. We were there just kind of by ourselves in this little house. And then a busload of all Black people came. So we were the white people in this group of the 50 or so people, hearing the story of free Black people, free people of color.
So there was a whole neighborhood community in New Orleans where these Blacks who had bought their freedom thrive. They had thriving business. They were artisans. They were architects. They had lovely homes. This was all pre-Civil War, and they were getting really advanced. They had a great community going. And
we get that quote first when you're going. That's what.
Sure.
This was in the museum there.
In the museum, yeah. Until the lion writes his own story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.
Wow.
And then when the Louisiana Purchase happened, and after the Civil War, there's a lot of chaos. People were, Black people were.
This before the Civil War.
Okay. They were threatened with incarceration and re-enslavement.
Essentially, it became illegal to become a free Black person in Louisiana.
So they had to move out or
you'd be put in a chain gang for a while, and if that didn't convince you to leave, then you'd just be re-enslaved.
Wow. Wow.
And prior to that, some other things.
Yeah, there were a lot of rules for the black people who were living there. One thing was that all the black women had to wear a headdress to distinguish them from the white people. But the black women, took this law and they made it a fashion statement. And they had these lovely head wraps. So it was just interesting.
This is just the group, the lady that was speaking there is the woman who's the proprietor of the house of the museum there, she knows that.
And this is a little poster showing all of the black people who were in the government, who had been voted into government during this time. And I was trying to, it's hard to
This is
see
1863, so this is during Reconstruction.
during Reconstruction.
Okay.
Because the blacks were allowed to vote, and there were a lot of blacks voting. They were the majority of the population. So there was a huge influx of black voices in the government until things changed.
Just a note on Reconstruction, again, we can't give it black history and civil rights history here, but after the Civil War, there was a lot of protection for the freed slaves. And it was basically in the form of federal troops that were throughout the South. Then, some decades later, here, there was a disputed or presidential election, and a deal was made basically that, all right, this guy can be president, but we're going to take all the troops out of the South. And that was the end of Reconstruction, and that became the beginning of the Jim Crow era, without getting into it. So Reconstruction was a good time, and then things, blacks were thriving, voter registration, participating, and it changed drastically when the troops came out. So.
Oh, and this is just a beautiful painting done by a black artist of some of the community. I'm not quite sure what the pictures of, but they were thriving as artists. It was beautiful stuff. Then we went to the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, which was only built in 2017. And I recently learned that this was the first civil rights museum in the country to be at least partially funded by a state. No state had put any money into any civil rights museums. And you'll see along the way some of these museums and places we visit are kind of homegrown, locally funded places. But this is a beautiful museum. Here's some of the attitudes of the people back at the beginning of the Civil War.
Yeah, our new government is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race is his natural, normal condition. That was the vice president of the Confederacy. We learned a lot about convict labor. I'm going to mention this again toward the end of our talk, but the 13th Amendment of the Constitution abolished slavery with an exception for punishment for a crime. As we mentioned before, the economy of the country, in particular the South, was dependent on abundant, cheap, virtually free labor. And that was taken away. Well, we got to find some labor somewhere. Well, so black men were arrested for loitering, sent to prison, and leased out, convict leasing, leased out to farmers or whatever. So it was like slavery, but it was worse because the guys who are using them don't really care about them. They're not their property, so they don't need to treat them well. So during this period of convict leasing, it was kind of worse than slavery. And in some form, it still exists to this day. So.
There was an interesting display on the schools. Not only were they segregated, but the schools for black children only operated for like 4 months of the year because they needed the kids out in the field doing work. And whereas the white kids went to school for 9 months or something. And, you know, this, by 1940, they increased the black schools up to 6 months. And here's a picture. This is the years that Bob and I were born. This is the difference between the black schools and the white schools.
Same county.
Same county, exactly. Do you see any desks or learning materials in the black students' classroom?
Yeah, we saw several representations of this. One of the real advantages of the trip was we were able to learn the same thing in different ways in different places. And we saw probably 3 or 4 representations of this disparity in models and things throughout the different states. Then we had this, the next morning we had just this wonderful experience, thanks to Myra Nolan, formerly at the church here, to spend some time with John Perkins. You all know who John Perkins is? No.
It was in Pasadena.
Yeah, I mean, he founded the Harambe Center here and very, very influential in Montgomery there. Better kid than that one, Berean, Jackson, Mississippi. And that was the day after we saw him, he was going to be honored at a black tie event there at the university. And also through nationally, you know. And we just had the opportunity, just the blessed opportunity, just 2 of us and John just sit knee to knee for about 35 minutes in the elevator. And Berean would have been with us, but she wasn't feeling well. And it was just, we just had just this great time of sharing the Lord. And then he wandered around his house for a while trying to find a copy of his manifesto, this series of 3 books that he's written that you know, Count It All Joy, and One Blood, and He Calls Me, is about his life and what he's been through and what he's learned. It's amazing. So, unfortunately, I didn't think to take a picture of him, which we were just having such a good time. This is a Greyhound terminal in Jackson, Mississippi. As we were in town, we drove by that. Just to mention, I'll mention a little bit more later. The notion of freedom riders. Have you anybody heard of the freedom riders?
Yeah.
Freedom riders were groups of people in let's see, it's like 61. Among them was the late Congressman John Lewis, was one of the leaders. Largely young people, black and white, and the issue they're addressing, you know, one of the things you see in tracing the life of Martin Luther King and other people, there's something that they're addressing. In Selma, it's voting rights. In the freedom rights, it's you know the right of people to travel, interstate commerce, you know, in an integrated way. Sorry, I don't need the mic here. And so people, you know, would just get on a bus together, blacks and whites, ride together, and try to ride to a place in the sun. That's it. And
It didn't go
you
well.
know, I think the first one was stopped somewhere in a rural area. People were forced off the bus. They were beaten severely. The bus was burned. There's in Montgomery, there's a Freedom Rides Museum, and we learned quite a bit about that there. I think it was in Montgomery where basically the police said, well, they're going to be arriving at 7:30. They told the local guys, we'll show up about 7:45. So, you know, the local guys did what they did,
15 minutes.
beat them, and then the police came and arrested, you know, the riders of the bus, of course.
Right.
So anyway, this is one of those places.
We drove by the home of Medgar Evers. He was an early activist in civil rights. Is well known before Martin Luther King was, and he was assassinated here in his driveway in 1963. He had worked on the Emmett Till case, which we'll mention in a minute too, and a lot of other things. And as Bob has pointed out, this is just an ordinary home, and the wrought iron scroll work on this is like what the ones at our house. And it's just it's relatable. It's a real person.
Every time through the trip we heard about the rivers, of course, it meant something different to us.
Yeah.
I mean, having been right here, you shot just getting out of his car.
And the gunman who shot him went through 2 trials, jury trials by all white juries, and was not convicted. And in 1994, 31 years later, they found some new evidence, and he was finally convicted.
Wow.
His wife didn't let it go.
So, to lighten the mood a little bit that day, we did stop in Indianola, Mississippi at the B.B. King Museum. Yeah, anybody know what the B.B. stands for?
No.
It's not his name, it's not his initials. He was, blessed to say, he had a blues program on the radio. It was a white-owned radio station where he had a blues program. And he was known as Blues Boy King. So that's the B.B. word. And this was the light part of the day. Then we went on to.
This was at one of those locally funded museums about Emmett Till. And maybe you've seen, there have been a couple of movies on TV and in theaters about the Emmett Till story, which I would, if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend that. He was visiting his cousins. He was from the north, visiting his cousins, and he
was how old?
14, I think. He maybe whistled at a white woman. And later that night, some white men came to the home where he was, dragged him out, tortured him, lynched him, killed him. And
His body was found 7 days later.
yeah. And his mother was extremely brave. She wanted a picture of his mutilated body put in the newspapers so it would shock people, especially in the north, and it did. And his killers went through, they were acquitted immediately by an all-white jury, of course, in the local vicinity. And then
This courthouse.
that's the courthouse where and then a couple days later, they did an interview with Look magazine and admitted what they did.
But they'd already been acquitted, so.
Yeah.
Wow.
She just recently died.
So, and then we drove on to Memphis, and a lot of the streets during, I think especially during Reconstruction time, a lot of cities would have like a street that was kind of like the Black Street. The street that I forget the name of the street that Martin Luther King was born on in Atlanta, that was that street. There was a street in Jackson we went to, and in Memphis that was Beale Street, and it's still a hopping place. I'm sorry, this is just a little bit of the
Courthouse, yeah.
there's a courthouse there. So we stayed just a block away from Beale Street, and we kind of enjoyed the place. Went to B.B. King's place. We were big together and went to B.B. King's place, then we went down B.B. King Street back to our.
We had so much fried food and barbecue then.
So that was a fun evening, to preparing us for the next day. So the next day we were staying. We got a great rate at a kind of classic old hotel in Memphis, the Peabody Hotel.
Where they had the ducks wandering through.
And and they had like fancy hot chocolate we could get. We got our hot chocolate. It's a beautiful day. It's October day. It was sunny. We're walking about 10 minutes to get to the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel. The Lorraine Motel, as you may know, is the place where Martin Luther King was assassinated. And so we're walking there and just enjoying the walk and saw a little memorial on the way, and we turned the corner onto Magnolia Street. We're still a few blocks away. We can't really see the museum, but we just walk. We turn the corner on Magnolia Street, and I say to Sue, I just feel heavy. So my body just feels heavy.
And I said I was feeling exactly the same thing. It was like I can hardly lift up my legs to take a step, and it was, I don't know what exactly was this.
We told this story to a friend who'd also been there, and as we got to that point in the story, she says, "And you felt heaviness, didn't you?"
Oh, God.
No, we didn't feel it through the rest of the day or whatever,
It
but
dissipated.
it's just something we're not that kind of people. We don't feel the weird things at all. But somehow that place,
Wow.
coming to that place, we really felt it. So. So this is as we're approaching, you can see the Lorraine Motel sign there, there's also a Lorraine Hotel, it's all part of the museum now.
Of course, the Lorraine Motel was one of the few places where blacks could actually stay, So they turned it into a great museum.
Yeah, it's probably the most comprehensive museum on civil rights that we saw. We've not been to one in DC, which I'm sure is larger, but.
Like one of the exhibits there was about the sit-in at the Woolworths counter. And it just shows, the black folks came in and they sat down at the Woolworths lunch counter and the servers totally ignored them. And the white people around them come and throw milkshakes down their back and hit them and beat them and stuff. And they just sat there stoically. And the movie that's showing in the background shows the real video of it. And then after a while, the police come in and they arrest the blacks who are sitting at the counter doing nothing. And it was amazing to me that there were some young black gentlemen, young white gentlemen behind me looking at all of this. And, they're probably in their early 20s. And these guys are saying, what? They arrested the black folks? Not the others. And it's like they hadn't heard this story. That's what these museums are for, to inform people of these stories.
Yeah, not to get into it, but there's a lot of movement around the country right now about that certain stories ought not to be told. And this is particularly concerning to us. Okay, okay.
There's a picture of Ruby Bridges, who you may know was one of the first black students to be integrated into a public elementary school there. And you've probably seen the famous Norman Rockwell painting of a black girl in a white dress with the 4 federal officers escorting her to school. And we just recently heard an interview with her.
She was on Colbert last week.
Yeah, so a brief interview with her. And was something we didn't know, is that she was the only white student in the classroom. As soon as when they brought her into the school and put her in the classroom, all the white parents ran in, grabbed their kids, and took them out of the classroom.
She stayed back out of the whole school for a while. That day, she was the only student in the school.
And then they brought in a teacher from Boston to teach her.
But that whole year, she was the only student in the. This is just one of the many Rosa Parks exhibits we saw, and learned a lot about the dynamics. It's a very interesting story. It's not just she's had there in Boston. There's lots of interesting dynamic and a lot of other people. And it was this led to the bus boycott, which lasted for a year there in Montgomery. And they were looking for somebody to give leadership, and so they found somebody who was well-educated, well-respected, and very reluctant to take over the leadership, which was Martin Luther King, who was a pastor in the town. That was really the beginning of his involvement in civil rights. So this is just a little more on the freedom riders. You can see, a picture of a burned out bus, 60 miles east of Birmingham. That was the first one plan led crowd, 50 smashed windows, slashed tires, vandalized the bus, etc. And on the second bus,
There were several incidents. And there was also a display of jail cells. Martin Luther King was jailed off and on. He was arrested 30 times in his life for different things. And he wrote a letter from the Birmingham jail to the local pastors.
the white Christians.
Yeah, to encourage them to do something.
Basically calling them out for not doing anything. So now we'll go later to Selma and March. Let me just explain again. I said before, Selma was about voting rights. As it says here, that there was a county there with 81% black population, 0 registered black voters. 118% of the white people were registered. You can sort of figure it. And Sue pulled up.
Let's see, we got this, this was from the Legacy Museum, but it was just a sample. They started, enforcing these voting rules. Oh, you have to pass this test to be able to vote. The ridiculous questions like, how many windows can be counted on the White House in Washington, D.C.? Some geometry questions. How may the county seat be changed under the constitution of your state? And the most, it's this racist one. How many seeds are in a watermelon?
So this is part of the test you have to take to be able to register to vote. If you're blind.
Yeah.
So the march to Montgomery was to march to the state capitol and say, hey, we need to be able to vote. And again, John Lewis was one of the people, and he was really the leader of the first attempt. Martin Luther King was involved, and he wasn't there that day. It became known as Bloody Sunday when they tried to cross the bridge, and they met with state troopers and others who just beat them. Just trying to march, just to bring attention to voting rights. Some days later, they succeeded in taking the march. It was a few days to get from Selma to Montgomery, and they'd have to stop at different places. There were people who were kind enough to allow them to stay on their farm, stay in their place. These thousands of people who were marching to be able to stay.
Yeah. And like this one woman who had a grocery store, she gave them provisions for the marchers, and her grocery store was burned down. Farmers that allowed them to camp on their farms were, threatened, and their farms burned down, and they were kicked out of the camping and stuff like that. But was one interesting highlight. They had some famous musicians volunteered to come entertain the campers, the marchers. So we have, Tony Bennett, Sammy Davis Jr., and so on, coming to entertain them. It was the more stuff that could be, gotten for, what do you call it? Publicity. The better.
Let me just interject. Now we're running long. We'll try to pick up the pace a little bit, but we're sort of, it's getting to our heart. Our hearts are getting stirred again. So it's taking us a little longer because this is
Stick to the script.
But yeah, I hope no one to go a few minutes over. All right, but this next story, there are a number of things that were just very, very, very impactful to us. And we just shared you, and this is one of them to see. Okay.
Viola, she was a white mom in Detroit with 5 kids. And she came down to the march to help ferry black people back and forth from Selma to Montgomery. And as she was doing this, KKK guys came out and they shot her in her car.
Oh.
And she was the only white woman to be killed with civil rights stuff. She's a mom from Detroit.
So the museum, as I said, all this stuff we were talking about has been from the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, and it's built around the Berean Motel. And as you go through the last place you go is kind of the rooms where Martin Luther King and his group were staying, and then the balcony where it was shot. So both place and story. The story part of it was just kind of learning, understanding kind of why he was there, in some of the context. He was very discouraged the night before. He was supposed to give a speech. It was raining, and he just didn't want to give a speech. He just was not in a good place. And he said, "Look, people have come out, and you need to give a speech, Martin." So he went out. The speech he gave that night was, "I've been on the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I mean, I get there with you." So the next night that there's a rally is supposed to be occurring, they're in a good mood. It says here they had a pillow fight. They were joking around. And then he's out in the balcony and he looks out, he sees a sax player who's gonna be there that night, and he says, you know, I want you to play Precious Lord, Take My Hand. And that's when he was shot.
Wow.
Wow.
So you can see the photo, you see where he's lying there. Yeah, that's right there, we're standing. You look across to the building on the left, the right side, you see a little small window. We also were over there, and that's the window from which he was shot. You can see the line of sight, and they have a line in the pavement which shows the clickable.
Hmm.
Okay,
Okay, then we're.
Later that
town is-
day.
Later that town.
we still Memphis.
Memphis, okay. Went to the Slave Haven Underground Railroad Museum, and you can see a little hole in the bottom of the house, right there. The slaves would be hiding underneath there.
This is the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, and from that hole, there was a clear view down to the river. And so they could sit there and watch to see when the coast was clear to continue their flight.
One thing, we were not allowed to take pictures in here. I really wanted to take a picture of this one horrible thing I saw. And I'll just try to describe it to you. It was again, so very impactful to me. It's got an iron sculpture. It's big. It's in the shape of, you've maybe seen, the caricature of a black person as a monkey, sort of crouching down. And then there's like it's smooth on the top, because what it is, it's a boot scraper. So what you're supposed to do is to take your boot with the horse dung on it, just scrape it off on this caricature of a black person. So then the next day, we drove to Montgomery, and that, first of all, we couldn't take pictures, but you got the
Yeah. The Legacy Museum
um,
is a whole.
how many of you heard of Brian Stevenson?
Oh, yeah.
Black Harvard lawyer, Christian man, very influential. He was very impactful in both the next two things we saw. The Legacy Museum there in Montgomery, especially focuses on slavery and lynchings and just a lot of deep insight. You know, we came to understand, you know, the degree to which the U.S. economy, not just the economy in the South, the whole U.S. economy was really built around the cheap labor of slavery. Northern insurers and shipbuilders and others benefiting from slavery. There are insurance companies whose names you would recognize today who made lots of money insuring the cargo, that is the slaves.
Wow.
Various places we've heard that not many slaves came directly from Africa to America. They spent their time being trained in the Caribbean. The word they used for that was they were seasoned. That was impactful to me as well. Lynchings, you know, lynchings were not just in the South, they weren't just in the dead of night. There were a lot of lynchings in the North documented. Lynchings, in some cases, would be a Sunday afternoon activity that you go to, people like us, would go to after church, take the family out, take a picnic, see the lynching, get a picture taken with the body, maybe get a little piece of the body.
Oh my God.
So, a lot of impactful stuff we learned there. But then
The same group has put together this National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Maybe you've seen pictures of this recently. As you approach it, you just see all these boxes hanging they're made of metal boxes. And as we get closer, you see that each box represents a county someplace in the United States. And
the county in which a lynching occurred.
lynching occurred. And on each box, there are names burned in, you know, cut through the metal of the box of the name, if it was known, and the date of when they were lynched or killed.
Sometimes many with the same last name.
Yeah,
On the same day.
families, couples, individuals, maybe a group of 20 people on the same day. It was, when you see names, it really is like, these are people.
You see how these are suspended from above, they're not quite touching the ground.
And as you progress around the memorial, these boxes are, you're going downhill a little bit. The boxes are being raised up higher and higher. By the time you get to the end, it's like a bam, it's just a lynching.
So that was again very impactful.
And then they have these boxes repeated with names again, also kind of like laid out as columns. And this,
Then the next day we drove to the summit. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah. So this was the National Voting Rights Museum, again, put together by a local group. And we saw one of just a lot of interesting stuff. One of the things we noticed in there was an injunction by a local judge saying that it's illegal for more than 3 Black people to get together to talk about civil rights. Well,
We're just giving you like 0.5% of you're sharing here. So then the Edmund Dennis Bridge, you've probably seen this. This is where the March from Selma to Montgomery began. Bloody Sunday happened inside, and so we sort of undertook to kind of try to very consciously walk across and try to put ourselves in the shoes, literally the shoes of March. And you've seen this structure, and what we notice is when you get to the end, the far side of the structure, you're not yet at the crest of the bridge. It still has ways to go. You're about 3/4 of the way across the bridge before you can see what's waiting for you on the other side. Then on the far side of the bridge, we saw this. With my finger, one of the things I'm pointing out.
Again, there's this pile of untaped rocks, and we go, what's this about on the other side of the bridge? And we walk up to it, and there's an inscription on the stone from Joshua 4:21-22. When your children shall ask you in time to come, say, what mean these 12 stones? Then you shall tell them how you made it over. And just, saw a lot of tie-ins with the Israelites fleeing slavery and so on.
We drove by the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, which was the Martin Luther King's church where he was when the only church of which he was a senior pastor. There in Montgomery. Sorry?
Sure, tissue.
Okay. There's one.
Okay, then we were in the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and we saw pictures of, there had been these in the churches, the children had been meeting, learning songs and so on, and to go on marches to protest. And you've heard about they turn the fire hoses and the dogs loose on these children.
On the adults first, but then when the children marched, they even arrested the children.
So this is 1963, and it's hell. And I think we went through all this stuff, but
As if that weren't enough.
yeah. Then there was the bombing of the 4 young girls in the church. 1963. And it was
Eddie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, Denise McNair, and Cynthia Wesley. They were in their best, getting ready. It was Children's Sunday, so they were participating in service. It's just a few minutes before the service, and outside the church is a bomb place, and they're standing right on the other side of the wall.
And I noticed as we went all through so many of these museums that the things that happened before I was born, I would kind of say, they just didn't know better. They just didn't understand. But I noticed that anything that happened after I was born, it was like, wait, these are my peers, these are my parents. How could they have done this?
So then we went on to Atlanta. Here we are with Jim and Pam Pearson, Bereans. They were with us that day, and we stayed with them. We went to outside of Ebenezer Baptist Church, which was the church that Martin Luther King's father was the pastor, and he became co-pastor of. A lot of stuff was closed there still with COVID. We weren't able to go into the museum and so on. There's Martin and Coretta are buried in the area there. There's a wonderful reflecting pond that displays on sort of his pacifism values, his home. A lot of stuff. We'd like to go back and see more of it, but we were able to see some of that.
Just a couple more pictures.
Yeah, we're getting close to the end of it. Wrap up stage here. Let's see, where am I? Okay. And then we went to Charleston. We took a wonderful black walking tour. And everybody's doing the sort of Charleston, carriage ride, beautiful Old South tour, and we're doing sort of the black history walking tour. We felt better about that. But this is the old slave mart. There was. They got embarrassed about having all these slave auctions on the steps of the courthouse. They said, you can't do that anymore. So now they got an indoor slave market in
Charleston.
So we learned about, preparing the slaves for sale and stuff.
All right.
And then we also went by the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, which you may recall, this is much more recent history, 2015, where my family and 9 people died.
And we spent some time with Ted and Julie Magrum, former Bereans, also Bereans at large. We went to the Bella community, which is a whole other story about some pretty black people in that community. And went to Savannah with them. And this is in St. Augustine, Florida. This is a beautiful structure, which they call the flower market now. But this was the slave market.
Oh.
We don't want to call it slave market.
Yeah.
But it was, it just was sort of emblematic to us of kind of rewriting history. Okay, so
What did we learn? What's like?
what are the lessons that we learned? All right, so hearing new stories and pursuing the stories backwards and forward to point connection, as I mentioned before. We really learned the value of that during this trip. Again, connecting with others' experience across time through being in the same space.
How these kids were otherwise well-intentioned people to be blinded to the influences around.
So struck that, you're just a person, your pastor's telling you this, your parents are telling you this, your politicians are telling you this.
You're in the Bible Belt, it's all good Christians.
Of course you're gonna believe what's being told to you.
And the significance of the black church.
Yeah, that's a whole other.
Yeah.
That's so good. Also really struck by the nonviolence at the heart of Martin Luther King's approach. He had great respect for Gandhi, traveled to India. And genuinely that was really at the heart of his convictions. Also, understanding the abhorrent attitudes toward black people are necessary to sustain slavery in a democratic, freedom-loving Christian nation. And the persistence of those attitudes to this day. I think, we just have to come to grips with how do people have to think about black people in order to have slavery. And that just doesn't stop just because you say there's no more slavery. And we really do still experience it today.
So how has this affected us?
Well, despite what we just said, this is one of the best things we have ever done. I mean, we've been on 45 cruises. This is one of the best things we've ever done. It was a trip not of guilt, but rather of discovery and challenge and motivation and journey, not of shame, but of connection. It was life-giving to us. And we had many life-altering experiences really every day. It continues to deeply inform and influence us on many levels. 2.5 years later. It gave us a much greater sense of what it can mean to day by day to be a black person in America.
Okay, and we gained some empathy and respect for what Black people have endured and accomplished, not only in the distant past, but also 2024. And a heightened sensitivity to our own deep-seated negative attitudes toward Black individuals.
And I want to mention those together, because, I still find myself having attitudes that are kind of natural or automatic, that are not appropriate, and to understand and recognize that, but also to say, I also have different kind of attitudes that I'm beginning to gain, which attitudes of respect and of one of the things coming out of this.
And gives us something meaningful to talk about together and with others. A lot of great conversations.
Yeah, you're sitting on the table, you talk about the kids, you talk about your vacation, you talk about the house, what else you talk about? Well, this gives us something. Okay, so, go ahead.
Are we okay? What do we hope Bereans will take from this? If you need to.
It's okay, but this part right now is meant to be challenging, so please take it to heart, okay? And all love. And also, it's to us too. The first thing that we hope you'll take from this is openness. Openness, curiosity, and openness. If your response to these stories is yes, but, when you hear something like this, yeah, yes, but ask yourself why you need to deflect the narrative rather than allowing it to be inside you. I think this goes about these stories or other things that you hear. Things that they don't quite fit the narrative. I think there's some other, there's something else going on there. It's not really. Just ask yourself why you need to deflect it rather than letting it inside you and think about it. You may not agree, but at least to kind of not just deflect it. You may or may not like this quote. I love this quote. You may or may not like this quote. Curiosity. With respect to understanding racial issues, Martin Luther King wrote, it is an aspect of their sense of superiority. White people of America believe they have still little to learn. Now, our challenge to you is demonstrate that that's not true of you. Okay? I'll give you another quote, similar quote. The objective reality is that virtually no one who is white understands the challenge of being Black in America. You may be surprised by who said that.
I don't know how long ago that was, but.
Well, it's in a documentary that we're going to be showing soon. And then urgency. Often one hears people say that slavery ended almost 160 years ago and they're tired of talking about this. Have you ever heard anyone say that?
Yes.
Okay? But it's not up to us to say when slavery has become irrelevant. Certainly those who are still affected by our country's racial history are tired of dealing with it. So let's open our minds and our hearts, all of us, and work on them together now. Okay, last little bit.
And where do we go from here? And we're happy to share a copy of these slides, talk with individuals or groups and, go host a time to go deeper if you're interested. You can add
Don't rush through this.
Okay, but let us know.
We're happy.
We're happy.
If you would like to, if you'd like to have a time to talk about this more, we're happy to set it up, just, okay?
Okay.
All right, they're still sitting here, guys. I'll wait till the chat. All right.
And, what's that? Okay, and maybe even another road trip. We talked about, if there was a group of people who were interested in actually seeing some of these things, we might be happy to lead that. And explore and discuss on your own or in groups and tell us what you were learning and thinking.
That's what it says.
Okay.
Okay. And also, to go beyond Black history, this has been a great thing, a great study, but also, Latino, Asian American, Pacific Islander, Native American history and issues. They're different, these are not, it's not just a different color, it's a whole different kind of set of issues that go with these. Just immigrants generally, and migrants generally. The issue of refugees, and which is, these are interrelated, but refugees is a different kind of issue. Those with disabilities, those who are in poverty, the unhoused, the incarcerated. Jesus actually talked about the sheep and the goats. You came and saw me in prison. Somehow Jesus cared about you. He didn't say, well, if they're in prison for their faith. I don't think he necessarily limited it that way.
Yeah.
And people are in prison, So, and this is a big issue. This is an enormous issue for our society. And we are not generally well informed about it. I am not generally well informed about it. We are starting 2 weekends from now. We have a 3-week series in the Garden of Theater. You all get the invitations on incarceration. So I would really encourage you to think about coming. It's good. It's it's informative, and I think it will be helpful too. And just others who are marginalized or oppressed or powerless. Just now you might say, okay, so where's our reading list? Where's our and we talked about that, but it seemed like we're happy to certainly share anything for us. We've got a lot of books and stuff. This is just stuff we got from this trip, not other resources. This is just things we picked up on this trip. And you're happy to share this with you afterwards here. But also, in some ways, you read a book and that person tells you what you think about that or this person. I urge maybe to do what we did, which was to say, well, what's stirring within us? What's God, what's the Holy Spirit stirring up, bringing to our mind and heart? And just go off and investigate. You get Google, You can learn all sorts of stuff. So I'd say in a way, sort of develop your own resources around what it is that God might be stirring in your heart, whether it's about Black history or anything else. And any way we can help, we can help. With that, okay, it says pray. So I'll pray. Quick pray, she says. Oh, please, it's not even quarter hour. Thank you. All right, Lord, thank you for your presence with us. That you are sovereign and that you care about your creation. We are privileged to be able to share your heart for people. Pray that you open our hearts to all of your world. Allow us to bring your grace and love. In Jesus' name.
Amen.